What if doing the right thing was the very thing that put your life in danger? Imagine knowing that by tomorrow morning, you will be dead. Not because you committed a crime, not because you betrayed anyone, not because you failed, but because you refused to stop praying. That was the night Daniel faced. No army, no weapon, no escape plan, just a stone chamber, cold ground, and hungry lions pacing in the dark. This wasn't a metaphor. This wasn't a hard season. This was claws, teeth, breath in the darkness. And here's the part that makes it uncomfortable. Daniel could have avoided all of it. All he had to do was close a window. Just one window. Just pray silently. Just blend in. Just adjust a little. Just compromise enough to survive. No one would know. It would still be faith, right? But Daniel didn't whisper his faith. He opened the window. He didn't hide. He knelt 3 times a day. While the law said, pray to the king, Daniel prayed to God. And everyone knew. You ever notice how obedience sometimes feels like it makes your life harder? You choose integrity, doors close. You choose purity, friends disappear. You choose truth, people misunderstand you. And suddenly it feels like faith is costing you more than it's protecting you. That's where Daniel was. Promoted, respected, favored, and because of that, targeted. Jealous officials couldn't find corruption in him. No scandal, no weakness, no hidden dirt. So they weaponized his devotion. They built a trap around his consistency. And that's how he ended up standing at the mouth of a lion's den. Can you imagine the silence as they sealed the stone? The sound of the rock sliding into place. The fading torchlight. The last glimpse of the sky. Darkness. This wasn't a sermon moment. This was a survival moment. And here's the question that hits different. Where is God when obedience lands you in a den? Because Daniel didn't get rescued before the den. He wasn't stopped at the edge. The law wasn't reversed. He was thrown in. Sometimes faith doesn't stop the fall. Sometimes it meets you at the bottom. That night, the empire slept peacefully. But inside that cave, he wasn't alone. And by morning, the story would flip the entire kingdom upside down. Because the lions didn't touch him. Not one claw. Not one bite. Not one wound. Something happened in that darkness. Something invisible. Something powerful. Something that proved this. Being surrounded doesn't mean being abandoned. So if you feel like you're in a den right now, pressure closing in, opposition louder than ever, doors sealed shut, maybe this isn't the end of your story. Maybe it's the night God shuts mouths you can't. Stay with me. Because what happened in that den wasn't just about survival. It was about authority. And by the end of this story, you'll realize something bold. The place meant to destroy Daniel became the platform that elevated him. Let's step into the darkness. Before Daniel ever stepped into the lion's den, the real battle had already started. And it wasn't about animals. It was about influence. Daniel wasn't just a faithful man. He was a high-ranking official in a powerful empire. Under King Darius, he was elevated above many others because of his integrity, wisdom, and what Scripture calls an excellent spirit. That excellence made him visible, and visibility made him a threat. The other officials didn't hate Daniel because he was weak. They hated him because he was incorruptible. They searched for flaws in his leadership. They audited his decisions. They investigated his past. Nothing. No scandal. No dishonesty. No hidden compromise. And when they couldn't find weakness in his work, they targeted his worship. That's how spiritual battles often work. The enemy doesn't attack where you're failing. He attacks where you're faithful. They realized something dangerous about Daniel. He would rather die than disconnect from God. So they built a strategy around his devotion. They convinced King Darius to sign a decree. For 30 days, no one could pray to any god or man except the king. On the surface, it sounded patriotic. It sounded loyal. It sounded harmless. But it was engineered to isolate Daniel from the very source of his strength. Here's the deeper battle. Control. Empires don't mind your faith as long as it's private, as long as it's silent, as long as it doesn't influence culture. But Daniel's faith was visible. He didn't pray in secret out of fear. He prayed openly out of consistency. When he heard about the decree, he didn't panic. He didn't gather supporters. He didn't protest. He went home, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and knelt. That detail matters. He didn't adjust his routine. He didn't reduce the frequency. He didn't lower the volume of his obedience. He prayed just as he had done before. That's the line that exposes the real fight. This wasn't a sudden burst of bravery. It was daily discipline. And daily discipline is dangerous to systems built on fear. Let's be honest, most pressure doesn't scream. It whispers. Just this once. God will understand. You don't have to be extreme. Why risk everything? Daniel wasn't facing lions yet. He was facing compromise. And compromise always comes dressed as convenience. The real battle wasn't the den. The real battle was, would he shift his devotion to protect his position? Because once you start adjusting your convictions to preserve comfort, you're already in a different kind of cage. Daniel chose consistency over comfort. And that decision triggered the consequence. They caught him praying. They ran to the king. And suddenly, the law that was meant to flatter the king trapped him too. Even King Darius was distressed. He valued Daniel. But Persian law couldn't be reversed. Isn't that interesting? The same system that elevated Daniel couldn't protect him. Your job can promote you. Your reputation can honor you. Your skills can distinguish you. But none of those can shield you when spiritual resistance shows up. Only God can. Daniel was arrested. No dramatic speech. No resistance. Just obedience, all the way to the edge. And here's the truth most people skip. Sometimes doing right won't prevent consequences. It will provoke them. But consequences for obedience are not the same as consequences for rebellion. One leads to regret. The other leads to revelation. That night, as Daniel was led toward the den, the empire thought it was ending a problem. They didn't realize they were setting up a miracle. Because the battle was never Daniel versus lions. It was faith versus fear. Allegiance versus ego. Heaven's authority versus earthly power. And heaven doesn't lose. Now the stone is being rolled into place. The crowd is watching. The law has spoken. But the real question is about to be answered. What happens when a faithful man is sealed in darkness? Let's step closer to the den. The story of Daniel in the lion's den isn't folklore. It's recorded in Daniel chapter 6, and every detail matters. The decree was signed. The trap was set. And Daniel knew. Scripture says when he learned the document had been signed, he went home, opened his windows toward Jerusalem, and knelt down as he had done before, giving thanks to God. Notice that. He didn't pray in panic. He gave thanks. Before the den, before the arrest, before the miracle. Gratitude in advance is a different level of faith. The officials caught him and rushed to King Darius. They reminded the king of his own law. And suddenly, the king realized he had been manipulated. He tried everything to rescue Daniel. But the law of the Medes and Persians could not be revoked. Daniel was brought forward. And this is one of the most powerful lines in the chapter. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." Even the king recognized something. Daniel didn't serve God occasionally. He served him continually. Consistency built credibility, even with unbelievers. Then they threw him into the den. A stone was placed over the mouth. The king sealed it with his signet ring. No escape. No loophole. No human solution. That detail is important. Because when God moves, no one can say Daniel slipped out. No one can say it was luck. No one can say the lions weren't hungry. It had to be God. That night, King Darius couldn't sleep. He refused entertainment. He fasted. But inside the den, silence. No screams recorded. No struggle described. Just this line the next morning. At the first light of dawn, the king ran to the den and cried out in anguish. "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Pause there. The king didn't ask if Daniel survived. He asked if God delivered. Even the king framed it as a God question. And then, from inside the darkness, came a voice. "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him." Let that sink in. God didn't remove the lions. He restrained them. God didn't cancel the den. He controlled it. And Daniel says something profound. I was found innocent before him. Before he mentions the king, before he mentions the law, he mentions God. Daniel's confidence wasn't in political innocence. It was in spiritual alignment. He knew where he stood with God. And that matters. Because when you know you're aligned with God, you can stand in places others would collapse. The king ordered Daniel to be lifted out. Scripture makes this crystal clear. No wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. No wound. Not scratched. Not shaken. Not scarred. The same den that should have ended him, proved him. And then the reversal. The men who accused Daniel were thrown into the den, and the lions overpowered them before they even reached the floor. That detail confirms something important. The lions were real. The danger was real. The miracle was real. This wasn't symbolic safety. This was supernatural protection. And the chapter ends with King Darius issuing a new decree that all people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall not be destroyed. The empire that tried to silence Daniel ended up amplifying his God. That's the scripture anchor. Daniel 6 doesn't just show survival. It shows authority. God's authority over law, over predators, over politics, over night seasons. And here's the takeaway rooted in scripture. God may allow you to be placed in the den, but he never surrenders control of it. The same God who shut the lions' mouths then has not lost power now. The question isn't whether God can shut lions. The question is, will you serve him continually before the den, so you can trust him confidently inside it? Next, we need to talk about identity. Because what happened in that den didn't just prove who God is. It revealed who Daniel already was.
When Daniel was lowered into that den, something had already been settled long before the stone was sealed. His identity. Because the den doesn't create identity. It reveals it. Daniel wasn't trying to become faithful that night. He already was. He wasn't building courage in the dark. He had practiced it in the light. That's the part people miss. Public crises expose private habits. Daniel didn't suddenly decide to trust God because lions were near. He trusted God when life was stable, when promotion came, when comfort was available. Faithfulness in calm seasons prepared him for violent ones. Let's zoom in. Daniel had lived in Babylon for decades. Different culture, different language, different values. He was educated in their system, promoted in their government, surrounded by their power. Yet he never let the environment rename him internally. That's identity. The empire changed his location. It didn't change his allegiance. And when pressure came, he didn't ask, "Who am I now?" He already knew. Here's something powerful. The king called him servant of the living God. Not politician. Not administrator. Not advisor. Servant. That means Daniel's primary identity wasn't his title. It was his devotion. If your identity is rooted in position, pressure will shake you. If your identity is rooted in approval, opposition will break you. If your identity is rooted in God, even lions can't redefine you. The den wasn't a test of strength. It was a test of self. Who are you when survival is on the line? Are you still who you said you were? Still praying? Still aligned? Still consistent? Because identity built in convenience collapses in crisis. But identity forged in daily surrender stands unmovable. Daniel's enemies thought they were attacking a habit. They were confronting a foundation. And foundations don't panic. Imagine the scene inside that den. Darkness. Heavy breathing. Massive shapes shifting in the shadows. Daniel could have spiraled mentally. What if this is the end? What if God doesn't intervene? What if I misunderstood everything? But identity silences those questions. When you know who you belong to, fear loses its grip. Daniel didn't need to see the angel to know he wasn't alone. He didn't need proof in the moment. His entire life had been proof. That's the difference between emergency faith and established faith. Emergency faith asks, "God, are you there?" Established faith says, "God, I know you are." The den wasn't random. It was the collision between two identities. An empire demanding worship. A servant refusing to bow. And when those two collide, something must break. That night, it wasn't Daniel. Here's what this means for you. Your current pressure may not be punishment. It may be exposure. Exposure of who you really are. Exposure of what you truly trust. Exposure of whether your faith is seasonal or structural. The den doesn't decide your identity. It declares it. Daniel walked in as a servant of God. He walked out as a testimony of God. And nothing about his core changed in between. Next, we need to confront something real. If God could have stopped the decree, why didn't he? Because sometimes protection doesn't look like prevention. Sometimes it looks like presence. Let's go there.
If God could shut the lions' mouths, he could have stopped the decree. If God could send an angel into the den, he could have blocked the trap before it formed. So why didn't he? Why did Daniel have to go through it at all? This is where faith matures. Because we love the idea of protection, but we define it as prevention. We think protection means no danger, no opposition, no loss, no threat. But in Daniel's story, protection looked different. God didn't prevent the den. He governed it. There's a massive difference. Prevention removes the battle. Governance limits the damage. Daniel still faced lions, but the lions had boundaries. That's powerful. The enemy had access, but not authority. The empire had a decree, but not dominion. God allowed Daniel to be placed in the den, but he never surrendered control of it. Let's zoom out. If Daniel had been rescued before the den, no miracle in the dark, no king running at dawn, no public decree honoring God, no shift in the entire empire's perspective. Sometimes God allows the stage to be set, so his power can be undeniable. Because a rescue before the crisis can be explained away, a rescue inside the crisis cannot. The den became a courtroom, and God put his power on display. Here's something deeper. The den exposed the jealousy of the officials. It exposed the weakness of the law. It exposed the limitations of the king. But it also exposed the supremacy of God. Without the den, Daniel remains a respected official. With the den, he becomes living evidence. Your hardest season may not be about survival. It may be about revelation. Revelation of who truly governs your life. Think about it. The stone was sealed. The king fasted. The empire slept. But heaven was not silent. An angel was dispatched, not to remove Daniel, to guard him. God didn't transport Daniel out. He occupied the space with him. That changes everything. Because sometimes God doesn't change your location. He changes the atmosphere around you. The lions were still lions. They just couldn't act like it. The danger was still present. It just couldn't execute. This is why presence is more powerful than prevention. Prevention keeps you comfortable. Presence makes you unshakable. Daniel walked into that den with consistency. He walked out with authority. And here's the truth most people don't want to hear. If God removed every threat before you faced it, you would never see how powerful he actually is. Faith that never enters darkness, never witnesses divine intervention. The den wasn't proof God failed Daniel. It was proof God trusted him to carry his name into impossible territory, trusted him to represent heaven under pressure, trusted him to remain aligned when surrounded. And when morning came, the entire empire learned something. God doesn't always stop the den, but he always decides what the den is allowed to do. Next, we need to talk about the reversal. Because the same system that tried to silence Daniel ended up amplifying him. And that's where this story shifts from survival to elevation. Morning came. King Darius didn't send a servant. He ran. Before court, before ceremony, before protocol. He ran to the den, and he cried out into the darkness. Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God been able to deliver you? Notice something. The king wasn't confident in his own power. He was questioning God's power. That's influence. When your faith survives pressure, people who doubted start watching. And then, a voice from inside the den. Alive, calm, unshaken. Daniel answered, not trembling, not traumatized, not broken. My God sent his angel and shut the mouths of the lions. That sentence changed everything. Because the empire thought Daniel was alone. He wasn't. The officials thought the lions were uncontrollable. They weren't. The king thought the law was final. It wasn't. And when Daniel was lifted out, Scripture says something powerful. No wound was found on him. Not one. The same den that should have scarred him didn't even scratch him. That's reversal. But it doesn't stop there. The men who plotted against Daniel were thrown into the same den, and the lions overpowered them before they even hit the ground. That detail is uncomfortable, but it confirms something undeniable. The lions were never passive. They were restrained. There's a difference. God didn't remove danger from the system. He restricted it around his servant. Now watch the public shift. King Darius issued a decree to all nations and languages under his rule, that they must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. Not just tolerate, reverence. The empire that tried to criminalize prayer ended up broadcasting God's authority. That's what real reversal looks like. Daniel didn't just survive a private trial. He triggered a public declaration. The platform meant to destroy him became the platform that displayed his God. And here's the deeper truth. Reversal doesn't mean you avoid the den. It means the den becomes evidence. Evidence that your faith wasn't theoretical. Evidence that your obedience wasn't wasted. Evidence that heaven governs even when systems conspire. Daniel walked into that cave accused. He walked out vindicated. He walked in targeted. He walked out untouchable. And Scripture ends the chapter with this line. Daniel prospered, not barely survived. Prospered. The man they tried to eliminate became untouchable in influence. That's what happens when God defends you. Now here's the real question for the viewer. What if the pressure around you is setting up a reversal you can't see yet? What if the den is temporary, but the authority coming out of it is permanent? Because when God flips a situation, He doesn't just restore you, He establishes you. Next, we land this. Because this story isn't just history, it's a mirror. The story of Daniel doesn't end in the den. It ends in influence. It ends in prosperity. It ends with a king declaring that God is alive. But let's bring this home. Because your lions may not have fur. They may look like pressure at work, isolation, reputation attacks, closed doors, unfair systems, silence from heaven. And maybe right now you feel sealed in. Stone rolled in front. Options gone. Future unclear. Here's what Daniel teaches us. The den is not proof of abandonment. It's proof of alignment under pressure. God could have prevented the decree. He didn't. God could have stopped the arrest. He didn't. God could have blocked the fall. He didn't. But He controlled the outcome. And that changes everything. Because your situation may look sealed, but it is not sovereign. There is a difference between being surrounded and being surrendered. Daniel was surrounded, but the lions were surrendered to God. The empire was loud, but heaven was authoritative. And what tried to silence him became the stage that elevated him. Here's the bold truth. The den didn't promote Daniel. His consistency did. The den simply revealed it. So if you are in a season where obedience feels costly, faith feels risky, integrity feels isolating, and silence feels heavy, you are not being buried. You are being witnessed. Heaven sees. And sometimes God allows the pressure. So the testimony cannot be denied. When morning comes, and it will come, the same people who questioned you may be the ones asking how you survived. And your answer won't be strategy. It will be simple. My God was with me. The den is temporary, but what God builds through it is permanent. Daniel walked in accused. He walked out established. And the lions? They became footnotes in his story. So if you're in the dark right now, remember this. God doesn't always remove the lions, but He decides whether they have a voice. Stay consistent. Stay aligned. Stay faithful before the den, so you can stand unshaken inside it. Because the place meant to end you might just be the place God uses to announce you. And when He shuts mouths, no system can reopen them. That's the story. That's the authority. And that same God is still ruling over every den today.